The first project we're going to do is the Seasoned with Love project, and it's the technique, I'm calling it the automatic stipple, because it's the one that brings in the stipple when you're in the embroidery section of your machine, and it automatically puts that stipple around your embroidery design. So that's what we're going to do first. This technique is done kind of like the mug rugs, okay, and the piecing in the hoop, or the project that we're doing is done like this. So we're going to do the applique, the quilting, piece the borders on, and then lay our background or our backing fabric on top. It'll sew it, leave an opening, we'll turn it right side out. So the quilting is not done through your backing, okay? It's just done through your top and your batting. So think of this kind of like a mug rug, one of those top projects. It's like on here, we brought in the center design, we added the stipple around it, and then it stitched the whole thing off all at one time. So on the back, you're going to see your quilting and the design. On the pillow here, same technique. We brought in the designs, did the stipple, and then we put the pillow together, and so you don't see that back. Okay, it's not like a quilt necessarily. Okay. So we're using the poly mesh stabilizer because my thought process was, if you have the poly mesh stabilizer and then you're going to have a piece of batting and you're going to have SF101 ironed onto your fabric, that's going to be stiff enough to support the design. So on your supply list for the first project, the Season with Love project, I had you cut a piece for your background, 11 by 11, a piece of the backing, 11 by 11, and then your batting. And then we did iron the SF101 onto your background. And then you have 4 pieces for your borders, and they are 2 by 11, I believe. And then you have a 7 by 7 for the outside border of the design, and then a 6 by 6 for the inner border, which on here. So my burgundy is going to be where my green is here, and then my off-white polka dot is going to be with where the flowery is there. So that's the inner border. I did go ahead and on this piece I ironed a piece of SF101 onto the back of it just because it's a lighter fabric and I didn't want the darker fabric to show through. So that's the only reason I did that. If you're using a darker fabric for this inner piece, you don't have to iron the SF101 onto it. Then we also have 2 pieces of ribbon if you're wanting to hang it. So on your USB stick, these are the designs that we're going to be using for these 3 projects. For this project, you have the Seasoned with Love design, and then I have created the piecing for the borders and the construction technique, and so that's what that little block is there. So we're going to be using those designs. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to create our own placement line for where all of this stuff needs to go. Okay, so all we're doing first is just creating us a placement line. So we're going to go into the IQ Designer, and we're going to get a shape, our square. And so we pick our square, we say OK, and then I need to size it. And we're going to size it, I have to look at my notes, 9 1/4 by 9 1/4. So I'll put up, so you're sizing the square 9 1/4 by 9 1/4. The reason we're doing that is because our finished size is going to be 9 inches. So when this is all done, this is a 9-inch square. Okay, I want a 9 1/4 for this placement block because this is just to give me an idea where to put my fabric. Okay, so we're just bumping it up 9 1/4 or thereabouts. You don't have to get exact, so that's close. So then we're going to say okay. Now I just want this to be a placement line, so I just need a straight stitch. Okay, so I have to apply and I have to tell it to be a straight stitch. So remember, when we're working with the outlines, we're working with the area around the pencil. Okay. Okay, sorry, we had to answer the phone. So, okay, I think I've got my square sized, and now we're going to tell it to be a straight stitch. So we're going to use the icons around the pencil. The piece of paper, that's your settings, so that's where you go to tell it what kind of stitch you want it to be and what color you want it to be. Right now, our options are the double stitch or the triple stitch. So we're going to choose the double stitch. And then see how it comes up in black. I like to always go ahead and choose a different color, and so that way we'll say okay, when you apply the change, you'll see that turn to a different color. You can't touch the square yet. Remember, you always have to touch the bucket. So you touch the bucket, then you touch the square, and see how it turns red. So I know it took that setting. So now we have it as a double stitch and we have it in red. Then that's all we need to do here. We're going to push next. Now on the Solaris, if you have a Solaris machine, you're going to have not as many steps. Okay, on the Destinies, the Stellaires, the Altair, the Meridian, all of those, you have a couple of steps to go through. One thing we can do here on the Solaris, it's going to be over here on the side, but down here you can play with the stitch length. And so if you wanted to, you can bump that up, because this is just a placement line, you know, kind of like a basting type stitch. So you can increase that stitch length if you wanted to. You don't have to. Then you push set. I'm going to hit preview, and this is where we can go look at it. This is just saying, do you want to continue? Yes, we want to continue. Okay, so this is where we can see what we have. Again, the Solaris, you won't have as many steps. Then this is definitely what we want. Push set. This is where, when you get this screen, this is where it's going to convert it to an embroidery design. So we're good with that. We're good with what we want. So you're going to push OK. And now it is an embroidery design. So we're ready to stitch it out. So we're going to hit embroidery. Okay. Now we're going to, oh, I need thread. Hang on. Okay, I got threaded up. Now, I'm just going to be stitching on the poly mesh. So I've just hooped it up. And just a note, I didn't have any of the wider poly mesh. And we're using your bigger hoop. We're going to use either the 9x14, 8x, or 9x16, whatever they are, your big hoop, or like this one's one of the square ones, it's the 9.5 by 9.5. You can't do the 8 by 8. It's got to be the 9.5 by 9.5, at least widthwise. And so I've doubled up kind of right here in the middle of the narrower pieces of poly mesh and got me a big piece. So what we're doing is we're just sewing on the poly mesh the placement line. This is a double stitch, so remember it's going to go around it twice. I'm going to use that as my placement line. I'm going to let it stitch around once. I'm going to stop it, lay my fabric down, and then start the machine again and let that double stitch be my tack down also. So we're just going to stitch the placement line first. Hopefully that doesn't catch on that foot. So when it comes back up here, I'm going to have to stop it because it's going to want to go around this twice. Stop it, cut the thread. Then I've got my background fabric that has the SF101 ironed onto it and my batting. And I'm going to put those together, the background fabric right side up. I'm going to lay that on top of my square and then just start it again. And so that double stitch that we created can be your tack down or your placement line and your tack down. You just have to stop it in between the two. now we're going to go get our design and put the stipple around it. So I'm going to go to home. We're going to go back into embroidery, go to your USB stick, find the Quilting with Designer folder, and we're going to get the Seasoned with Love design and push set. We're going to leave it right in the center. We're going to go to edit, get your stipple, okay. And when you're doing this stipple, okay, that's in the edit in your embroidery, you only have your options out here for your border, for your background basically, of the different size hoops, okay? So you're going to go pick whichever hoop you're using, or actually you could go ahead and pick the 9.5 by 9.5, even though that's not the hoop you're using, because our square is 9.5 by 9.5. So just pick that size hoop. It's on here somewhere, 9.5 by 9.5. So that's going to fill in our square here. If you picked the bigger hoop, then it's going to be, way too big, and it's going to come off your, even though if you are using that bigger hoop, it's okay. We're just going to pick the 9.5 by 9.5 inch square. Now here you can play, so the distance is going to be how far away from that design do you want the quilting to be. So I can bump it up a little bit. I don't want it just real close, so I usually increase it a little bit. Doesn't really matter, just kind of your preference. Now on the Solaris, you will be able to see the change as you're making it. On the Destiny, Altair, Stellaires, all of those, you can hit preview, and then you'll be able to see what you've created. If you decide you want to play with it some more, you just keep playing. So like that distance is good. I'm going to increase maybe the spacing. The spacing is going to be the size of the stipple. And seeing if I did it up to 0.220 on my first sample. So we want to see what it looks like again. Again, on the Solaris, you'll be able to see it. On all the others, you hit preview, and then you'll be able to see it. So we just made the stipple a little bit bigger, and we're good with that. So we say OK, and we're ready to sew. Hit embroidery. So this is going to stitch the design and then the quilting around it. So we're going to start our applique. First, it's going to do the placement line for your outside border. Okay, y'all know how to do this. So basically what it's going to do, are you zoomed in kind of on this? Okay. It's just going to do the placement line for the outside border. You'll lay your piece of fabric down. It'll do the tack down. I'm not sure. I'm looking here. It'll do placement line, tack down. Yeah, then it's going to do the placement line and the tack down for the inner piece, and then it'll come in and start doing the satin stitch and the words and everything. So we're going to do all that, and then we'll come back so you don't have to sit here and watch all this. Okay, so we've stitched off the complete design, and now you can see the last stitch out is going to be the stipple design around it. So we're going to stitch that, and then we'll come back and we'll just start putting the little, we're going to say mini quilt, put it together. So all we're going to do now is stitch the stippling. So we got the quilting done. So this is basically the lesson for this project. This is the automatic stipple. So it automatically comes up around the design and it stitches off with the design. And so then you would take your project and you would sew it into something like the pillow or whatever. So what we're going to do is make the little mini wall hanging. So I'm going to show you step by step how to do that. So you're going to go back to the embroidery part in your machine and go to your USB stick and the Quilting with Designer, and we're going to bring up the construction part, and then we'll set that. And this is going to be just like you've done a lot of the Kimberbell stuff. So this is going to be kind of the piecing in the hoop. So what it's going to stitch off first is going to be the placement line for my top border. And then we'll lay that down with the bulk of the border down into the block, and then with the top of it even with that placement line, and then it's going to stitch the seam line. Now, I'm not going to trim anything. Like in a lot of the Kimberbell stuff, you could come in here and trim that. I'm just kind of leaving that because I've made the seam allowance pretty small. So it went back out of the way, so I can't use my little pin. So when we're done doing this step, I'll flip it. So now it's going to stitch the placement line for the bottom border. That piece down even with that placement line with the bulk of the border in the middle of the block again, and then stitch that seam line. So we're just really not trimming anything. Okay, so now I gotta take this off so I can get to these. So now we'll do our little pin and we'll run it along that seam line. And I don't think I had this on your supply list, but you can use your little fabric folding pin. That'll help. With that. And do it on this one. With that. Okay, and so now we're gonna do the side borders. The placement line first. Okay, now this I do want to trim. So I'm not going to worry about the background fabric and everything, but just this bulk right here. Just go ahead and trim that off, and then lay side piece down, make sure it's even, side even with that placement line, stitch that. Okay, now it's going to do the placement line for this side. Trim those little pieces. Lay your last border down even with that placement line. And then stitch that seam. Okay, and then we'll use our little pin on both of those. And I know it's not even summer yet and we're doing fall. Okay, now it's just going to stitch kind of a tack down box for all of this. This is just going to be a square all the way around to hold all this down. Okay, hold that little corner right there so y'all don't do that. You could take that corner down up there so y'all, let's see if I can take that out a little bit. And it's not bad, it'll be okay. Okay, now what it's going to do is stitch a placement line for our ribbon. Now, if you're not going to hang this from a little stand, then you don't need to do the ribbon. Oh. Okay, now we're going to tape your ribbon in place. You could stitch these little placement lines in a little bit darker color, but they're kind of underneath so I can see where they're at. And you're going to need a couple of pieces of tape. And you're going to take your ribbon, fold it in half, and then you want about 1/4 of an inch up above that placement line. You can kind of use your border, see, as a guide. So just have the fold of your ribbon even with that border, and then tape that in place on that line. I'm gonna come down here. I can work a little easier. And then take your other piece of ribbon. There's my placement line. Have the fold even with that bottom border, centered, the ribbon centered in that placement line, and then tape that. Now I created this outline, this construction, so I'm kind of skipping a step. I'm not going to go ahead and tack this down. I'm just going to tape it on here. Then I'm going to take the background piece, or this is your backing, okay? We're just going to lay this down right side down on top of everything, and then it's going to sew this closed, and it's going to leave an opening here at the bottom to turn it right side out. Then once we turn it right side out, yes, we will have that tape in that, but it'll just tear off, so we'll be okay. So we're just kind of skipping a couple of steps here. So we tape those pieces of ribbon down, lay your backing piece right side down on top of everything, and then stitch this. So it's done. It just stitched the final construction line, left an opening down here, and so you will just unhoop it, and then you'll trim it about 1/4 of an inch away from that seam line. Clip your corners, turn it right side out. You're going to leave the poly mesh stabilizer in there, but just turn it right side out, and then just fold up your little opening here and whip stitch it shut, and then you will have your little mini wall hanging. So this is the first one. This is the easy one. Like I said, this is just the simple automatic stipple around the design. The next video that we're going to do is going to be the quilt as you go video, and we'll hopefully get that out to you in a couple of days.